My daughter-in-law thought she was clever, switching my real diamonds for fakes one piece at a time. She didn't realize I'd installed microscopic tracking chips in every stone after reading about nursing home jewelry thefts. The first time I noticed something was off was during Sunday dinner at my son Richard's house in Boston's Back Bay. Susan, my daughter-in-law of 12 years, was wearing a new tennis bracelet that caught the light in a peculiarly familiar way. When she saw me looking at it, she quickly covered it with her sleeve and changed the subject to my grandson Tyler's college applications. "That's a beautiful bracelet, Susan," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Is it new?" "Oh, this?" she laughed a little too brightly. "Just something I picked up at an estate sale. You know me, always hunting for bargains." I did know her. I knew she hadn't worked in 3 years, claiming she needed to focus on being a present mother for Tyler, who was 17 and barely home. I knew she spent her days at the country club and her evenings online shopping. And I knew that the specific way that bracelet refracted light was identical to how my grandmother's diamond bracelet used to shine, the one I'd worn to their wedding, the one Susan had always admired. "Estate sales can have wonderful finds," I agreed, then added casually, "I should check my jewelry box one of these days. I haven't done an inventory in ages." Susan's hand stilled on her wineglass for just a moment. "You should be careful with your valuables, Eleanor. At your age, it's easy to misplace things." At my age? I was 76, not senile. But I smiled and nodded, playing the role of the doddering old woman she apparently thought I was. That night, I went home to my apartment in Brooklyn and opened my jewelry safe. Everything appeared to be there. My mother's pearl necklace, my grandmother's emerald ring, the diamond earrings Harold had given me for our 40th anniversary before he passed. But something felt wrong. The weight of the emerald ring was off. The pearls didn't have that subtle warmth real pearls carry. The diamonds seemed too perfect, too uniform. What Susan didn't know about me was that I'd spent 35 years as a forensic accountant for the FBI. I'd learned to spot frauds, fakes, and thieves long before I learned to spot gray hairs. And 2 years ago, after reading an article about a series of thefts targeting elderly women's jewelry in nursing homes, I'd taken precautions. My nephew Marcus worked in tech security, specializing in asset tracking for museums and galleries. Over coffee one day, I'd asked him about micro-tracking technology. "Aunt Eleanor, are you worried about something?" he'd asked. "Just being cautious," I'd replied. A woman in my book club had her entire jewelry collection stolen by a home health aide. By the time she realized, everything was sold and untraceable. Marcus had helped me implement a comprehensive security system. Each genuine piece in my collection had been fitted with a microscopic GPS chip, invisible to the naked eye, embedded in the setting or clasp. The chips were passive until activated, undetectable by standard security wands, and could be tracked through a smartphone app that looked like a simple calendar program. I pulled out my phone now and opened the app. One by one, I activated the trackers. My grandmother's diamond bracelet showed up immediately, not in my safe, but at an address in Back Bay, Richard and Susan's address. The emerald ring in my safe didn't register at all because it wasn't chipped. It was fake. My mother's pearls showed 2 locations, one strand in my safe, fake, and another at a jewelry store in downtown Boston called Luxury Resale. The diamond earrings were currently at a pawn shop in Quincy. In total, 17 of my 32 major pieces were showing locations other than my safe. The real pieces had been systematically replaced with high-quality fakes, good enough to fool a casual glance, but not good enough to fool someone who'd spent decades spotting fraudulent documents and cooked books. I spent the next 3 days documenting everything. I photographed each fake piece, comparing them to insurance photos of the originals. I tracked the GPS locations of my real jewelry, watching as some pieces moved from pawn shops to jewelry stores to what appeared to be private residences. I pulled up my calendar from the past year, noting every time Susan had visited my apartment, every family gathering where she'd had access to my bedroom. The pattern was clever, I had to admit. She'd started with pieces I rarely wore, a Victorian brooch, an Art Deco hair comb, a pair of opal cufflinks that had belonged to Harold. Then she'd grown bolder, taking items I wore occasionally but predictably. The pearls I always wore to church on Easter, the sapphire ring I wore to the opera each season. She'd been smart enough to leave the pieces I wore most frequently, my wedding ring, my everyday pearl studs, my simple gold chain. Those were real, ensuring I'd never notice the switches through daily wear. I also pulled our family financial records, the benefits of having done Richard and Susan's taxes for years. 6 months ago, they'd been on the verge of bankruptcy. Richard's contracting business had taken a hit during COVID, and they'd remortgaged their house twice. Their credit cards were maxed out, and Tyler's college fund had been drained. But suddenly, starting 4 months ago, large cash deposits had appeared in their account. They'd paid off one mortgage, cleared the credit cards, and Susan had started shopping at Newbury Street boutiques again. The timing aligned perfectly with when my jewelry had started disappearing from its GPS locations at my apartment. I needed to be absolutely certain before I acted, so I set a trap. I called Susan and invited her for tea, mentioning casually that I was thinking of updating my insurance policies and needed to photograph some pieces for the new documentation. "I'm particularly concerned about grandmother's butterfly brooch," I said. "You remember, the one with the rubies and diamonds? I haven't seen it in ages, and I'm worried I might have misplaced it." The butterfly brooch was worth approximately $65,000. It was also sitting in my safe, one of the few pieces she hadn't switched yet, probably because I'd mentioned 6 months ago that I was planning to have it cleaned and appraised for Tyler's future wife, whenever that might be. "Oh, I'm sure it's somewhere in your apartment," Susan said quickly. "You know how things can get tucked away. Would you like me to come help you look for it?" "That would be wonderful, dear. How about Thursday afternoon?" Thursday came, and Susan arrived with her usual air of helpful concern. She made a show of searching through my jewelry box, my dresser drawers, even my closet. "Are you sure you didn't put it in your safe?" she asked innocently. "Oh, I hardly use that old thing anymore," I lied. "The combination is so hard to remember these days." I watched her file that information away, saw the calculating look in her eyes. "We found the butterfly brooch in my bottom dresser drawer, where I'd placed it that morning, and Susan insisted on cleaning it for me right there with her special jewelry cloth." I let her handle it, watching as she examined every stone with the intensity of someone memorizing details. "It's even more beautiful than I remembered," she said. "Tyler's future wife will be so lucky." "Actually," I said, "I've been thinking of selling it. It seems silly to hold on to something so valuable when I could use the money for more practical things." Susan's head snapped up. "Sell it? But it's a family heirloom." "Well, yes, but at my age, what do I need with such fancy jewelry? I'd rather have the cash for medical expenses or maybe a nice vacation." "Don't make any hasty decisions," Susan said quickly. "Why don't you let me research the best places to sell it? I know some reputable dealers who would give you a fair price." I agreed, knowing exactly what would happen next. Sure enough, my tracking app showed the butterfly brooch leaving my apartment at 2:47 a.m. the following Tuesday. The GPS tracked it to Richard and Susan's house, then to a jewelry store in Cambridge the next morning. By afternoon, it was at a private residence in Wellesley. The fake brooch that had replaced it was excellent quality. The same weight, similar stones, nearly identical setting. If I hadn't been specifically monitoring it, if I hadn't known to look for the microscopic differences, I might never have noticed. Susan had probably spent 2 or 3,000 on the fake to steal a piece worth 65,000. But she'd made one crucial mistake. In her eagerness to swap the butterfly brooch before I could sell it myself, she'd acted too quickly. She didn't know that I'd had Marcus install a tiny camera in my bedroom smoke detector 3 weeks ago, perfectly positioned to capture anyone accessing my jewelry box or safe. The footage was crystal clear. Susan in dark clothing using a key to enter my apartment. Susan going directly to my jewelry box with a small flashlight. Susan making the switch with practiced efficiency. Susan checking everything was exactly as she'd found it before leaving. She'd done this before, many times. The camera had been recording for 3 weeks, and I had 4 separate incidents of her entering my apartment at night. I called a family meeting for the following Sunday, telling Richard it was about updating my will and I needed both him and Susan present. I also invited my daughter Patricia and her husband James, my nephew Marcus, and my lawyer David Kellerman. They all gathered in my living room, Susan looking perfectly comfortable, not a trace of guilt on her carefully made-up face. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I've discovered something quite disturbing, and I need to address it with the family." Richard looked concerned. "Is everything okay, Mom? Is it your health?" "My health is fine," I assured him. "My jewelry collection, however, is not." I pulled out a folder and handed copies of documents to everyone, the GPS tracking reports, the insurance photographs comparing real to fake pieces, the timeline of Susan's visits corresponding with the thefts. Susan's face went white. "I don't understand what this is." "Then let me clarify," I said, pulling out my laptop. "This is security footage from my bedroom, dated Tuesday at 2:47 a.m. I played the video. The room was silent, except for the sound of Susan on the screen, opening my jewelry box with latex gloves on her hands. Richard stared at his wife, then at the screen, then back at his wife. "Susan, what is this?" "It's not what it looks like," Susan started, but I interrupted. "It's exactly what it looks like. Over the past 6 months, Susan has systematically stolen approximately $380,000 worth of jewelry from my collection, replacing each piece with a high-quality fake. She's sold my family heirlooms to pay off your debts and fund her shopping sprees." Patricia gasped. "Susan, how could you?" Susan's carefully constructed facade crumbled. "You don't understand the pressure we've been under. Richard's business was failing. We were going to lose the house. Tyler wouldn't have college tuition. Eleanor has millions in jewelry just sitting in a box, never worn, while we were drowning." "So you stole from me?" I asked calmly. "Instead of asking for help, instead of telling me you were struggling, you chose to violate my trust, my home, and commit felony theft?" Richard looked devastated. "Mom, I had no idea. I swear to you, I didn't know." "I believe you," I said, and I did. Richard was many things, sometimes oblivious, often too trusting, but he wasn't a thief. "What are you going to do?" Susan asked, her voice small. "Are you pressing charges?" David Kellerman spoke up. Based on the evidence Mrs. Hamilton has compiled, you're looking at grand larceny, breaking and entering, and fraud. With the amount involved, you could face up to 20 years in prison. Susan started crying. Richard put his head in his hands. Tyler, who'd been silent in the corner, looked like his world was collapsing. I let the weight of that sink in before speaking. "I'm not pressing charges," I said finally. "But there are conditions." Everyone looked at me in surprise. "First," I continued, "every single piece will be returned. I don't care what you have to do to get them back. Take out loans, sell your cars, mortgage your house again. Every piece comes back within 30 days. Second, Susan, you will enter therapy for your compulsive stealing and lying. You will provide me with proof of attendance for at least 1 year. Third, you will have no access to my home ever again. Your key will be returned today. You will not be alone with me at any family gathering. Fourth, Richard, you will take over all financial management in your household. Susan will not have access to credit cards or bank accounts without your direct supervision. And fifth," I said, looking directly at Tyler, "your parents will tell you the complete truth about what happened. Not to punish them, but because you deserve to know why your college fund was really depleted and why your mother won't be at Grandma's house anymore." Susan nodded through her tears. Yes, of course, all of it. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. I don't know what came over me. It started with just one piece, just to get us through a rough month, and I planned to buy it back. But then you got addicted to the easy money," I finished. "I've seen it before, Susan. The justifications, the escalation, the inability to stop even when you're ahead. That's why therapy isn't optional." It took 6 weeks, but every piece was returned. Susan sold her Lexus and her country club membership. They took out a home equity loan. She sold her own legitimate jewelry, her designer handbags, anything of value she'd bought with my stolen money. The family dynamics were forever changed. Richard and Susan stayed together, but their marriage was strained. He installed financial monitoring apps on all their accounts. Susan wasn't allowed to have credit cards in her own name. It was humiliating for her, but it was that or face prosecution. Patricia, my daughter, was furious with Susan and refused to speak to her for months. Family gatherings became awkward affairs where Susan sat quietly in the corner, no longer the vivacious hostess she'd once pretended to be. Tyler surprised me by calling one day, asking if he could come talk. He arrived with a notebook and a serious expression. "Grandma," he said, "I want to understand how you knew, how you caught her when no one else even suspected." I explained about the tracking chips, the security cameras, the pattern recognition. But more importantly, I explained about trusting your instincts when something feels wrong. "The technology helped prove it," I said, "but I knew something was off from the beginning. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. Your mother showed me she valued material things over family trust. I just needed to prove it." Tyler nodded, absorbing the lesson. "I'm glad you didn't press charges," he said, "but I understand why you could have." "Family is complicated," I told him. "Justice doesn't always mean jail time. Sometimes it means setting boundaries and demanding accountability. Your mother is getting both." A year later, Susan completed her therapy program. She wrote me a letter, a real apology, not the desperate pleading of someone caught, but a thoughtful acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused and the trust she'd broken. She included a photo of a butterfly brooch she'd seen at an antique store, similar to grandmother's, but not quite the same. "I saw this and thought of what I almost cost our family," she wrote. "Not just the monetary value, but the heritage, the memories, the trust. I look at it every day to remind myself of who I don't want to be anymore." I didn't forgive her. Forgiveness would take more time, if it came at all. But I acknowledged her effort to change. The jewelry was back in my safe, now with upgraded security and a new will that specifically excluded Susan from any inheritance. Richard would receive his share, but in a trust that Susan could never access. The tracking chips remained active. The cameras kept recording. Because while I believe in second chances, I also believe in the old Russian proverb, trust but verify. My daughter-in-law thought she was clever, switching my real diamonds for fakes one piece at a time. She didn't realize I'd installed microscopic tracking chips in every stone after reading about nursing home jewelry thefts. But more importantly, she didn't realize that a lifetime of investigating fraud had taught me to recognize a thief, even when she was sitting at my dinner table, calling me mom and complimenting my grandson's college applications while wearing my grandmother's stolen diamonds on her wrist. The real jewelry is back where it belongs now, each piece accounted for, each stone tracked and monitored. And Susan? She learned that the elderly woman she dismissed as an easy mark was anything but. Some lessons come with a price tag. Hers was $380,000 and a family's trust. Both debts have been paid, but only one can ever truly be recovered.